Today we're going to talk about virtual machines, and then we're going to actually install one on our Server 2012 machine. So if you don't have Server 2012 on your machine, I suggest you maybe pause this and go get that installed and then come back. So those of you that are still with us, a virtual machine. The technical definition from techopedia.com, which is one of my favorite sites to go to if I don't know something, says, and I'm going to read off the site because I want to get this right. A virtual machine is a software program or operating system that not only exhibits the behavior of a separate computer, but is also capable of performing tasks such as running applications and programs like a separate computer. A virtual machine, usually known as a guest, is created within another computing environment referred to as a host. Multiple virtual machines can exist within a single host at one time. So, what does all that mean? Basically, for instance, with what we're going to do with Server 2012, we installed Hyper-V on Server 2012. So Hyper-V is a virtual machine manager. It manages virtual machines. So what we're going to do is we're going to put multiple virtual machines there, and Hyper-V can manage all those. We can put Windows 8 on there. We could put a Linux machine on there. We could put Windows 10 on there all at once. It's kind of cool. So that's pretty much what it does. So let's see some advantages of virtual machines. You can like it says, you can put multiple operating systems, of course. They're widely available. They're easy to manage and maintain. And then they also offer disaster recovery options. There are some disadvantages and some drawbacks. Some of those are they aren't as efficient as physical machines. You will notice when we get into using them, they're sometimes can be a little bit kind of laggy, slow sometimes. And that's because the hardware resources, they're distributed indirectly. It's not, directly plugged in, connected, that kind of a thing. The multiple VMs running on a single physical machine, because if you have lots of machines running, the performance can be a little unstable. So, and you may run into that too, and some of that will depend on how you allocate your hardware. So we'll talk about that as we install and all that stuff too. When you do install, the installation is, you install the software just like you would on a regular physical computer. You would do it with like a CD, a DVD, or with an ISO image, or even if you have, like an operating system on a thumb drive. Let's go to our actual computer and install a virtual machine. Now we're going to actually install the virtual machine on our server. The first thing we actually need to do though is obtain software for that. So as you can see here on my desktop, I have a software folder. I have already obtained my software. I got it from our file share server in our lab. I can show you where you can get that. The easiest way to do that, there's two ways. Sometimes this way works, sometimes it doesn't. We can try it. Sometimes you can just go in here and type // and start typing file share, and it sometimes finds it. It didn't find it. Sometimes that works. Most of the time not. The other way is to come in here to your start menu like so and just type run, and then / and then put in the IP address of the file share server. I've already gone there, and you might double check to see that it's still the same. The network, the logical network topology is still up, might still be up on the board. You can probably find out from somebody what the IP address is for the file share server, and just type in that IP address, and then click OK, and it'll open it up. So here it is. Here's the ISOs folder. Double click that, and here's all your ISOs. This hasn't been updated in a while. Well, it has a little bit. The DreamSpark folder here has a lot of the stuff that we have the product keys for in the DreamSpark book. I know it's got Windows 10 in it now, and I know we've got some of the previews of Server 2016 in it. So that's some of the newest stuff that we do have. So it's a little bit updated. Once you get your software, then we just need to go into our Hyper-V Manager, which, if you remember, is under this Tools thing up here. There's our Hyper-V Manager. And then once you're there, over here on the right is New, and just click Virtual Machine. And there's always this before you begin page on most of these wizards. I always just click Next through it. Once you're here, then you name your virtual machine. And I think I'm gonna do my Windows 7 one first, so I usually just name them whatever operating system I'm putting, that I'm actually installing, just so I keep track of what I'm doing. If I do two of the same operating system, I'll put something slightly different to distinguish that. So Windows 7, I don't mess with the location of it, I just leave that, so click Next. I don't mess with the generation of it, I leave the default there, so Next. The memory, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. I always leave the startup memory at 512 megabytes, and then I check the box to use dynamic memory for the virtual machine. If you use static memory, basically for a virtual machine, then it will always start the machine with that much memory. So if you were to start up your virtual machine with, 2 gigs of memory, if you were to allocate 2 gigs of memory to your machine, then it would always use 2 gigs of memory. Never more, never less. And that's all it would ever use, and it would always have 2 gigs of memory. When you use dynamic memory, then it basically with this, it starts up with 512. If it needs more, then it gives it more. And whenever it's done with that, it takes it away. So, for example, if you have a system with only 8 gigs of RAM, if you were to put 4 virtual machines on it and allocate 2 gigabytes of RAM to each one statically, and then you wouldn't have any left for the host, and that would you'd be done. So if you allocate 512 megabytes of RAM dynamically, you'd be fine. So that's the reason for the dynamic memory. It doesn't waste all of the host computer's resources, and you can run the multiple machines all at the same time. I actually have my machine in the lab only has 8 gigs of RAM, and I can run about 5 or 6 machines at once on it with no problems whatsoever, running dynamic memory just like this. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So this is a wonderful setup. 512 megabytes of startup memory, because that's all it takes to start up a virtual machine, and then set it as dynamic so it'll just use what it needs, and then click Next. The networking, I usually wait and configure it afterwards, and we'll get into that because right now there's really nothing you can do. We'll go into the switch manager and I'll show you how to connect it to the internet. So just click Next there. The next one is the virtual hard disk, and this is where the only thing you really need to change in here is the size of the hard drive, because as of right now it has it at 127 gigabytes, and I don't think you want one virtual machine taking up 127 gigabytes of your physical hard drive. So what I usually do is I make sure I find out what the minimum requirement is for each operating system that I'm going to put on my machine is, and obviously I need to make sure I know how much space I really physically have on my machine. It's also good sometimes if you have 2 hard drives. I put all my virtual machines on one hard drive and I have my operating system on another hard drive. So it's just, there's multiple ways you can do stuff. For this, I think with Windows 7, I think I usually do like anywhere from 20 to 50 gigabytes, so we'll do 50. We don't do a whole lot with this stuff, so this is more than enough. And then that's all you really need to do there is just make sure you don't put 120 something gigabytes. So click next. The install options is where you're going to choose your ISO file. So we're going to click the install an operating system from a bootable CD/DVD-ROM, and then we're going to click down here image file, and then we'll click browse, and then go and find wherever you saved your ISO images. I saved mine out here in that software folder, and I'm doing Windows 7, so I clicked that and then it's in there, so then I click next. And the last page is just your summary of everything you've chosen. You want to make sure, double check, got your name that you want. Want to make sure your memory starts there, and you can change some of this stuff once it's all done too. So when you're done, just click finish. It'll configure and create. And then you'll see up here, I have a new virtual machine. Now it's not quite done yet because it's created, but it's not installed because, we haven't done the whole install thing like you would with a normal computer. So if you'll notice, the state here is off. So if you double click it, well, if I could double click it correctly, it opens up in a new window here. And then you've got all these fun little buttons across the top. One right here, this is your start button. So if you click that, it actually, it's just like your start button on your computer. It turns your computer on. So it'll start Windows up and it will start the installation process, just like any other computer. So, and all it really is you have a mouse inside. When you click out here, you notice my mouse turns back to my big gigantic pointer that I have, so you can see it a little better. When I click in here, you notice it's the smaller, because that is when I'm actually inside the virtual machine. So, and then these buttons here are kind of my action buttons. I can turn the machine off. This shuts it down. It's just an automatic power off, shut down. The save button will actually just save the state of the machine. It's almost like a pause button. Well, that's actually the pause button. But that saves it in its state. It just freezes it. And then that'll reset it. And then you get, with this action, you get kind of the same, you get the same thing as all these across the top. This is your media. Almost, you've got your DVD drive, your disk drive. Notice in the DVD drive, we have that ISO in there. You want to leave that there right now. So right now we're going to go through and do your basic install. So click install now. And you can make this full screen if you click maximize, but it doesn't really get much bigger right now. It will later. So you gotta accept, click next. With this, even though you've got to, just click next. And then it'll go through the install just like any other computer. And we get to sit and watch. After everything comes back, then you're going to be putting in it's going to ask for a username, computer name. You're going to set up your password. I always do the lab password. That way if anybody needs to get in to my virtual machines, they can. And then the hint, I put lab pass, so they'll automatically know what it is. Just your typical stuff. And then here's the big thing right here that I really wanted to show you was, again, the product key. And that's where that DreamSpark book is going to come in handy. And so you're going to need to remember to go and hunt that book down. Usually it's sitting by Mrs. Todd's computer. Sometimes somebody uses it, forgets to put it back, so you might have to look around the lab a little bit to try and find it. So I'm going to put a key in, and hopefully it's a good one. Sometimes people don't initial off by the keys that they've used, so they don't always work the first time and you have to go to a different one. Alright, let's see if it worked. Now it's wanting you to use recommended settings. And set your date and time. We are Central. It'll finalize your settings. And that's pretty much it. Then you have a virtual machine ready to go. And it's Windows 7 on top of Server 2012. When you go back to your Hyper-V Manager, some things to notice. Then now you've got a lot more going on up here. You've got your Windows 7 machine, the state of it, it's running, it tells you the CPU usage, the assigned memory. And then if you go down here, if you actually click down on these buttons here, if you click on the memory button, this tells you what is actually going on with it. So if you want to know the summary, what's going on, what's happening with the memory right now, this is the maximum memory it can use, this is the minimum memory, dynamic memory is enabled. So you see how that works now. And so the memory status right now, I'm not doing anything with the machine, so nothing's happening. So, and the CPU usage is at 0% because nothing's happening. This tells you the uptime, how long it's been running, and if I can just see it down here at the bottom. I can leave it minimized down there for days, and that uptime will just keep increasing and increasing and increasing, because companies will start virtual machines and let them just run, and that's what they do a lot of times. So that's just a little bit of what the Hyper-V Manager can do. Over here on the right, you've got, this is your actual server. That's Sirius, that's the name of my server. And then Windows 7, that's my virtual machine there. These are kind of shortcut buttons to do things when you can also come over here and right click on that and you get the same things as you get over here. So you can connect to it, you can get the settings, you can turn it off, shut it down, do all the same things over here as you could also do by right clicking it over there. Now that you know the basics of installing virtual machines, we can move on. So I need you to install one more Windows machine. It can be another Windows 7 machine, it could be Windows 8, Windows 10, it doesn't matter. And then I need you to install Server 2012 as a virtual machine. And then we can move on and do Active Directory and domain controllers next.